The limits that I'll be thinking of, or the limits I'll be arguing for, are not of that nature. They are of a more theoretical nature. They are of the in-principle kind. The arguments I shall offer all have different points of departure, but they are, as will appear in due course, nonetheless related in many respects. A limit from extra scientific knowledge. One of the aims of science, we might think, is to obtain knowledge. Scientists immerse themselves in all kinds of activities in order to, among other things, obtain and acquire and produce knowledge. But how shall we understand knowledge? In contemporary epistemology, knowledge is usually analyzed as true belief that has some further property that, on this occasion and in honor of the name giver of this lecture, we may call warrant. There has been and still is considerable debate as to what this property of warrant exactly is. For present purposes, however, I needn't enter this, for the point I want to establish can be made irrespective of one's favored account of warrant. But I do need to note that I will be thinking of scientific knowledge as true belief whose warrant derives somehow from science or scientific research. How exactly science or scientific research can provide warrants is a topic of great interest, one that I presently also need to forego, mainly because the point I want to establish can also be made irrespective of exactly how warrant through science works. As I said then, one of the aims of doing science is to obtain or to acquire or to produce knowledge. It should be uncontroversial, however, that there are many things that we know without science in any way being involved in its production or its warrant. Examples abound. To confine myself, initially at least, to my own case. When I open my eyes and look about, I see that the lights are on. And I also see that there are many persons present in this room. I also know that the world is older, much older actually, than 3 minutes, and that China is a very big country. I furthermore know that 5 plus 7 equals 12, 5 plus 7 equals 12, and that if John is taller than Jack, Jack can't be taller than John. And I know also that 6 couldn't have been odd. I also know that presently I'm standing on my feet, and that my feet are touching the floor. Again, I know that 2 weeks back I was in Toronto, that I am suffering from a mild pain in my left ankle due to a little accident I had when working out. And I know that I was born and raised in The Hague, in the Netherlands. I furthermore know many moral truths. Honesty is much better than honesty. Lying is wrong. I ought to help my aging mother. And I know that there is more demerit in an unjust act than in an ungenerous one. And as it is with me, so it is with you. You know many things, many of these things as well, and many more besides. The point of rehearsing these obvious and perhaps boring truisms is, of course, that we have acquainted vast amounts of knowledge without engaging in anything that merits the label scientific research. And hence, without the warrant condition for knowledge being satisfied by anything scientific. Let's call knowledge that is in fact obtained independent of science or scientific research, and that furthermore doesn't trace back to testimony that traces back to scientific research. Let's call such knowledge extra scientific knowledge. Now, one might have knowledge that is in fact extra scientific, but that could have been scientific. Many things that we in fact know without the help of science are such that they could be known through and with the help of science. An ordinary example to illustrate this. I know that my great-grandfather was a shipbuilder in Rotterdam. He was a shipbuilder by profession. The warrant condition for my knowing this is satisfied by testimony from my mother and other members of the family. But the warrant condition could also have been satisfied by something that involves research or scientific research. Scientific, now taken in a very broad sense. I might, for instance, have read a book on 20th century Dutch harbors and shipbuilding, in which I read that a certain man named Hendrik de Keyser was a shipbuilder. And I might know from other sources that that particular person was my great-grandfather. In that case, my knowledge that my great-grandfather was a shipbuilder by profession would be an instance of scientific knowledge, I should think. But not all extra scientific knowledge is like that. Not all extra scientific knowledge is such that, although it is in fact acquired and warranted by something that doesn't involve science, it could also be acquired and warranted by something that does involve science. Much of our knowledge, it seems to me, can, as a matter of principle, not be acquired or warranted through scientific research. Confining myself again to myself, it seems impossible that I know or come to know that lying is wrong in a way that somehow involves science. It seems impossible, so to speak, that science can satisfy the warrant condition for that knowledge. The same holds for other things that I know, such as that honesty is much better than dishonesty, and that I have an obligation to care for my aging mother. Other examples, perhaps somewhat more controversial, would be examples of knowledge of some of my own mental states. It seems impossible that I know or come to know that I have a headache when I have one, independently of my feeling headache, and exclusively in a way that involves, in one way or another, science. For, as Thomas Reid, it seems to me, rightly said in one place, pain consists in being felt. Let's call this sector of extra scientific knowledge the sector of irreducibly extra scientific knowledge. My contention is that irreducibly extra scientific knowledge marks a limit of science. There is knowledge that we have that cannot be obtained through or receive warrant from science. Contending this is, of course, as I indicated earlier on, neither criticizing science nor criticizing this sector of our knowledge. We face a fact here that we best wholeheartedly embrace. In the final part of my lecture, I will exploit this point and argue that it is nothing against religious belief that there is no scientific warrant for it, if there is no scientific warrant for it. Before moving on to a second limit, I want to bring out that the way that I've been thinking about scientific knowledge, namely as true belief that is warranted through scientific research, seems not at all to be the way that all philosophers of science talk about scientific knowledge. In the philosophy of science, it would seem a conjecture or a statement or a hypothesis or a theory can qualify as scientific knowledge even when no one believes it, and even when it's false. And this suggests something of further significance. It is often said that science is a fallible enterprise, and so it is. Many so-called results of scientific research performed not even very long ago are now no longer considered as valid for a whole variety of different reasons. And this means that many results of scientific research, even when believed, don't qualify as knowledge. Knowledge now understood again as warranted true belief. Such beliefs founder either on the warrant condition or on the truth condition. In the interest of time, I have decided to skip what I wanted to say about knowledge by acquaintance, and also to skip what I had planned to say about a limit from presuppositions. And in this section, the basic idea was that you can't do science without presupposing a whole lot of things. For instance, you can't do science without presupposing the validity of a number of inferential logical principles. And you can't do science without assuming that our basic cognitive faculties are by and large reliable. Or you can't do scientific research without supposing that nature behaves in a uniform way. And the point I was trying to make in that section, but which I won't try, but only announce that I would be trying it if I were to read that section, is that there are certain things that are absolutely fundamental to the scientific enterprise that science cannot prove to be true, its presuppositions. And later on, I would be exploiting that point when I would be insisting, which I also decided to delete from the talk here, that it's nothing against religious belief when it too involves presuppositions that cannot be proved by science, which is often used, at least in the circles I move in about, as an objection to Christian faith. So I'll go on with a limit from ultimate questions. There can be no science, taken in a very broad sense now again, without scientists asking questions. Some philosophers have held that scientific questions are characterized by a feature that non-scientific questions lack. Some Wittgensteinians, for example, have held that scientific questions have the peculiar feature that their answers take the form of explanations. But this cannot be right. What are the ultimate constituents of matter seems to be a perfectly good example of a scientific question, but its answer doesn't take the form of an explanation. And furthermore, there are clearly non-scientific questions whose answers do take the form of some kind of explanation. When it's asked, why are those windows wet? An explanation is called for. But the question itself is obviously not a scientific question, or I shouldn't think so. It may thus be impossible to fully characterize a scientific question, or what it is for a question to be a scientific question. What is or should be evident, however, is that there are extremely important, ultimate questions that cannot be answered by scientific research, not by science at least as we know it now. I'm thinking, of course, of such questions as, what are we all here for? Why is there something and not nothing? Are we free creatures? What moral principles, if they exist, should we heed? Does God exist? Etc. The sciences, still taken in this broader sense, do not answer questions like these. And it would seem that they cannot answer questions like these. What part or what theory in physics or biology or psychology or history is ever going to provide answers to these questions?